Put yourself in your customer's shoes. And if you cannot do that, you got to find someone who can. Because once you are in their shoes, then you can, you know what you need to do and say to sort of earn their trust and then keep their trust.
Hi, I'm Tino Mantella, and welcoming you to the 11th edition of Leading with Relevance. This is a podcast series featuring some of today's most prominent leaders, people that are busting through the status quo and impacting companies and impacting communities. Our goal is to interview people that highlight their personal and professional journeys and learning about their why, as Simon Sinek would say. For the listeners, we hope that you'll have practical insights that you can apply to your pathway and your journey to leadership. So I'm loving the opportunity to talk to and learn from leaders. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing Lynne Laube, who is now a partner with TTV, and we might get into that a little bit. Prior to that, she very recently, in fact, she served as operating partner for Valor VC. She currently supports Valor as an investor. She's also the co-founder of Cardlytics and recognized as one of the fastest growing tech companies in the USA in the past, Deloitte's Fast 500 and the Inc. 5000. She's one of the few women in the country that has taken their company from startup to public, also as their CEO. I believe there's less than 30 women that have done that. One of the top minds in the fintech space. That's how, when I ran the Technology Association of Georgia, I got to know Lynn and Cardlytics. Celebrated for leadership and innovation, Lynn was named one of Inc. magazine's Inspiring Women to Watch and receive Georgia's Women of Technology Women of the Year Award. She's also been recognized one of the top 10 venture-backed female founders by Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur 360. She's a winner of the Linder Award, which is with Linder College, which is part of University of Cincinnati. She's passionate about helping entrepreneurs succeed and championing minority and women-owned businesses. Lynn also serves on the board of directors for NerdWallet. So, Lynn, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. That was
Yeah,
a very kind introduction.
Well, it's great to see you again. I was always admired your leadership and also your generosity of time when we were building the Technology Association of Georgia. So thank you for that. So I like to start with like the early years, right? So the early part of your life, what shaped you?
Sure.
Three people that influenced you.
Yeah, I'm going to have probably a different story than most. I was not necessarily overly influenced by any particular person.
Okay.
But what really shaped me was the fact that I moved 17 times before I was 18, including 3 different high schools. And at the time, it was terrible. But what I realized looking back in hindsight is it helped me be more of a risk taker. It helped me learn how to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. When you walk into a school and you don't know a single person, it's pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so it translated a lot into my professional career, particularly as we were building and starting Cardlytics, because as you might imagine, you get a lot of, blank stares and people looking at you like you've lost your mind. So I think it prepared me. And that is one of the biggest things that influenced me.
Builds character, right? So
it does.
That's amazing. I never thought of it like that. But yeah, if you go to, how many different high schools did you go to then?
3.
Wow. Yeah. And each time that's the new kid
coming
to a school and needing to probably, even if you're an introvert, which I don't think you are, but to be out there and communicate.
Yeah. I mean, it's no different than walking into a VC cold and trying to pitch them to write you a check,
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And when I was at TAG, I felt like I was an extrovert, because you go into the meeting and you know everybody. But then if you go into a place like 500 people and you don't have a clue who they are, then I said, well, maybe I'm not really like this big extrovert. I'm more in the middle.
Yeah.
So I have down you were raised in New England, but I guess that's not exactly accurate because you were raised all over.
I
But
was raised all over, yeah.
you picked University of Cincinnati. Why did you pick that school?
It was terrible 17-year-old logic. At the time, we were living in Cleveland, Ohio, and Cincinnati was the furthest away from my parents' in-state tuition. I'm embarrassed to say it, but that was my 17-year-old logic. But
Yeah,
again, Cincinnati, one of the things that I believe in is grit. You really need grit. And I think, moving around, going to a school that's seen very much as sort of at the time, especially kind of a middle class, almost blue collar school, it taught me a lot of grit. And it's the number one thing I look for in founders as a VC now is, do they have the grit to sort of power through this? And I think that is the thing that really shaped me in my early years and even my selection of college. And frankly, even, my choice to go to Capital One, which sounds like a brilliant choice now, but at the time it was insane. No one had ever heard of it. They didn't even have a name and they were spinning off from Signet Bank. So I think grit is a big thing for me.
yeah, and so Capital One, you were there when it was really a startup. So
Yep.
at
Yep.
that time, when you were in school, did you see a path to starting your own company? Was that a dream that you had, or just kind of grew into that?
No, I mean, I always knew I had an entrepreneurial spirit. Like, I was a paper girl when I was 10. I was always making my own money and doing stuff. But I don't know that that was ever really a dream necessarily. But I will say, I started my career at Bank One, which is a great normal bank. They were acquired by Chase, but they're just a bank. And
Yeah.
what I realized after a couple of years is this is not for me. I need more risks. I need more excitement. And so when I got the phone call to come work for this crazy startup that really didn't even have a name yet. And what I was told is, we're going to democratize lending. And at the time, you go way back to Capital One days. If you wanted a credit card, you had to walk into your local branch. And if you were lucky, you got it for 22%. And that was it. And
Yeah.
so Capital One really invented and created this concept of risk-based lending, which really saves Americans millions, billions of dollars. And that was very compelling to me. And, it was the first big risk I think I ever took in my professional career for sure. And it certainly paid off.
Yeah, 22%. I actually forgot about those days.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
by the way, the only way you could get it is if you were white male.
Yeah. Wow.
Females, minorities, no. Yeah.
So you had a number of different roles at Capital One, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how, you went through the ranks and then you was Cardlytics right after Capital
Yeah.
One?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk
Yeah.
about.
I mean, I was very fortunate. Capital One's an amazing organization. And I was there as they were exploding in growth. And so you couple those two things and yeah, I had a wild ride. It was unbelievable. Every 18 months I was doing something different. I had the opportunity to go, build their business in the UK. So I lived there for 3 years. But, Capital One was very much the philosophy of you got to get fresh eyes. So you were rarely in a job, especially if you were doing well there, for more than 18 months before you had to go do something else. And again, going back to my days of moving to a new high school, taking on new jobs, taking on new challenges, that felt natural and great to me. There are plenty of people who would have hated that and there were plenty of people who hated
Yeah.
that and didn't want to stay there,
Yeah, that's interesting. So, uh, how did you move from Capital One, the kernel of the idea around Cardlytics? How did that all start?
Yeah. So my co-founder and I were working on a product called decoupled debit at Capital One. At the crux, Capital One was trying to figure out if they wanted to establish a debit relationship with the consumer. But in doing that, we started looking at debit accounts, which are very different than credit card accounts. With credit card accounts, most people use it as a loan. They put 1 or 2 transactions on it a quarter, and they're generally paying it down over the course of a year. Debit card, and you got to put your mind back. This is back in 2007, right? Debit card was just starting to explode. And what we saw looking at the debit data was, oh my God, this is where people are spending all their money. This is how they use their everyday spend. You put your gas, your groceries, all that kind of stuff on your debit card, not your credit card. And the insight we had was, my God, this data is incredibly valuable. Like we were actually looking at individual consumer accounts and you could tell like, this is a college student. This is probably a mom with 2 kids just by looking at their spend.
Yeah.
And then the other kernel of the idea, this is at the same time that online banking was starting to take off. And every bank in the country considered it another cost center. They didn't think about it the same way that like a Google or a Facebook thought about acquiring users. It was just another cost center by which they had to service customers. So the idea was this data is incredibly valuable. Let's use it. And who wants this data? Marketers. Let's use it to bring economics from a different industry inside banking and really help them monetize their online channels and deepen the relationship with their consumers. That was the core idea. That's how we came up with it. And ironically, people ask me all the time, how did the idea change? It really never did. The execution, some things we had to do, but the core idea is still what Cardlytics is today.
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of people talk about the pivot, and it's not necessarily always a good thing. Because I think oftentimes it's a company that's a little bit in flux, but you guys really stuck to your core. So we hear stories from people that you and I know that they've arbitraged their every credit card and their house and so on and so forth. How did you guys kind of get started with the program and funding and all of that?
I mean, honestly, Tino, we were very, very lucky, and I'm not sure I would recommend this for other founders, but my co-founder was a prior partner at Canaan, which is a very large VC on the West Coast. So we had an unfair advantage. They actually initially funded us. Oh. But I will tell you a story. We had a great term sheet from Canaan and an East Coast VC called Polaris. Yeah. But they really wanted an Atlanta investor involved so that there was somebody who could like see us and touch us and feel us, you know what I mean? Not literally, but and so we shopped our deal all over Atlanta. All the people that you still hear about today who are known as legendary investors, we got kicked out of every one of them.
Oh man.
Every one of them. So we ended up with a way less better deal because we couldn't find an Atlanta VC.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting because you and I know the journey of the Atlanta technology community and the investor community. Do you think it's gotten better? I mean, we helped start Venture Atlanta and
yes, I think it's gotten dramatically better. I mean, I still at the core believe Atlanta is still a big company town. And it's a journey they're still going through, but the startup ecosystem actually exists here today. It did not 15 years ago. So I think Atlanta has come a very long way. And I think the Southeast in general has come a very long way. But there's still challenges there's still not enough money here to keep the successful companies here. You know, I think about Cardlytics. When I stepped down as CEO, we hired a new CEO from the Bay Area. The vast majority of Cardlytics jobs are now in San Francisco. Okay. There's just not enough money and energy. And so we still have a ways to go. But it's dramatically better than it was.
For the younger startups, then, would you say that there's still some pressure, or there was at that time, if you're getting an investment from Boston or California or Dallas or wherever, that you're going to get pulled there?
I don't know that you get pulled there. The good news is, so I'll pick on Polaris, which was the VC that said you got to find an investor in Atlanta. Well, Polaris has now invested in many companies in Atlanta. I think they actually have a partner here. So I think a lot of that has actually changed over the years, but there is still that challenge. If you are wildly successful, if you're one of those companies that has to raise 100 million, you're going to have to go outside of Atlanta.
So for the people listening, you had quite a journey from startup to public company, one of less than 30 women that have ever done that. You've got to be so proud of that. We're proud of you. Talk about challenges along the way. I mean, I know you guys followed you very closely. We actually had, if you remember, but I think we brought about 150 tag members.
I remember that. Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. I mean, look, there were a million challenges. I called them near-death experiences. Every startup is going to have them. And here's the thing, they never go away. I remember the day after the IPO. It was an amazing day. So exciting. We were so exhausted, but it was just awesome. And the next day, everything was the same. It's just another financing event. So I think that's the biggest thing I've learned is it is truly a marathon. It's not a sprint. Don't start a company if you think you're going to get lucky and sell it in 2 years for 50 million to Google. You know what I mean? That's not why you do this. And you really got to have the attitude that this is very much a journey. You're going to experience a lot of near-death experiences. The lows are awful, the highs are amazing. And you got to have that grit to kind of get through both of them. Not let the highs make you so confident that you get overconfident, and not make the lows, let the lows, have you think your business is going to fail. You have to have grit, and you have to have balance, and you've got to be in it for the long term.
Well, you and Scott too, I think, came in with a lot of confidence. Your background explains where you could kind of stick with it even on the darker days.
Yeah.
I think you and I talked a little bit about this, but I have down assuring radical execution for your stakeholders. How did you keep the company going, make sure the stakeholders were engaged and supportive? And I know you guys were really big on execution.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about what Cardlytics did, we didn't just create a company, we created an industry. So when we first marched into banks and said, we're going to help you monetize your channels and bring economics from advertising into banking and deepen your relationships with your customers, most of them threw us out and said, there's no way we're ever going to give you access to our data or our customers. But Scott and I understood bankers. We'd been in their shoes. We understood the problems they were facing. So we certainly had to modify our pitch for sure to get the banks. Once we really started remembering to put ourselves in their shoes, and that's put yourself in your customer's shoes. And if you cannot do that, you got to find someone who can, because once you are in their shoes, then you can, what you need to do and say to sort of earn their trust and then keep their trust. And that's where the radical execution came into place. If we had one small error, the banks would freak out. They were giving us access to all their data and all their customers. So we had to act like a public company from day one, in terms of the execution, the processes, the transparency to the banks, because otherwise they wouldn't have worked with us. And so in many ways, they were our best discipline.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, so I just got back from a conference late last night, or I guess early this morning. And if I had $100 for every time somebody mentioned AI, I'd probably be So talk about how, you see things changing in terms of what you did at Cardlytics. And of course, you're an investor now. So technology is evolving.
Listen, technology, including AI, has evolved to such a point. If we were starting Cardlytics today, we could do it at a tenth of the money and with a tenth of the people. It is something to be embraced. Remember when the internet came on and people were like, is this going to be here to stay? It's here to stay. AI is here to stay. And so it's something you need to embrace. You need to use it. You need to welcome. You need to think about every process you have and, where and how can AI make it better? There's a new metric that investors are starting to look at very seriously now, which is revenue per employee. That was not a thing when we were building Cardlytics, but now it is not just, are you profitable? It is every person in that, company delivering huge amounts of revenue. The only way you really can do that is with AI. But again, it's your friend and the cloud and, the ability, technology overall, but you can build with a tenth of the money and a tenth of the time and a tenth of the people, you can build stuff today that you 15 years ago, you couldn't have. So embrace AI. Flip side is, don't think because you put, startup.ai.com that investors are gonna, it's not an automatic go. Every investor expects you to be able to talk about how you're intelligently using AI in your business. Yeah. And that's what they want to hear.
Yeah, Relevance, we do a lot of work with AI and also just with data optimization, which the two seem to marry each other here. So switching gears a little bit. So you've been a champion of women for as long as I've known you, and I think you had something at Cardlytics called Women of Cardlytics. So what advice would you give women who are aspiring to lead in technology? It's a big question, obviously.
It is a big question. And look, I'm going to say something that I still believe in, although it's hard to say given the latest administration and some activities. But at the core, I believe most men really do want women to succeed. And I also believe that men and women are very different. And so my advice in leadership is always to assume the best intent. I truly believe that if somebody says something that offends you, chances are they didn't even know. And if somebody, if you're saying something and they interrupt you, they didn't mean to, but guess what? They're going to keep doing it unless you call them out. And don't do it in public, because you got to assume that they have positive intent. And so I just truly believe that if you assume positive intent and you're very deliberate about having conversations when it felt like positive intent didn't happen, whether they treated you differently because you were women or whatever it might be, have those conversations professionally and in a very closed setting. But I truly believe most men want women to succeed, and you should assume that in your journey. And you should also be okay with the fact that women and men are different. We have different skills, we have different strengths, we have different weaknesses, we do. And embrace that. I'll tell you a story. The first 10 years of my career, I both dressed like a man, like I wore black pantsuits every day, and I act like I got into sports. I talked about football at the water cooler. Like I sort of tried to conform to being kind of, what the men do. And then I realized this is stupid. And so I started wearing fun clothes, and I started talking about cooking, and it was just fine. Like it was just fine, know? And so I think you got to get comfortable in your own skin first, and then you got to be comfortable with, confronting these issues. They will happen, by the way. Racism and sexism are unfortunately very, very real. So don't think it's not going to happen. The question is, how are you going to handle it?
Yeah, no, that's well said. That's really good advice. And how about you're an investor now, you've been an investor for a while. How do I put this? Are women coming in as prepared when they're making their pitches? And
yeah. It's a great question. And I think yes, they are as prepared when they get a seat at the table.
Okay.
They get fewer seats at the table. And I think it's in part because sometimes they're afraid to ask, and in part because there is still some, biases in the system. But women are very well prepared. Women can be just as good founders as men. They can do all the same things as men, blah, 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 blah. We all know that. So I do think they're actually well prepared. They just don't have, it's intimidating when you walk into a room and everybody is a man and you're a woman. Like, I'm sure it's very intimidating if you're a Black person, you walk into a room and everybody's white. And so that's the thing you really got to overcome. But most women, when they come to the table with their pitches, are as well qualified, and the pitch is as good as any man who gets to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that in my journey as well. So, following Cardlytics exit, how do you decide to move into the venture space?
Tino, honestly, isn't that what we all do? But I truly believe here's why. And from my perspective, it's a paying it forward. As you mentioned, there are very few women. There are very few people who did what we did, right? Building a company from nothing to post IPO. There are very few women who did it. Yeah. So, and certainly in Atlanta, there's even fewer. So I feel it's not just I feel it's my obligation to help other founders. There are so many lessons I learned along the way that were hard to learn, but now they're easy to teach. Just don't do this instead. And so I feel it's my obligation to work with younger, when I say younger, earlier in their career stages, founders, to help coach them. That's the only way we're going to get more women in power and more founders in Atlanta. Is we got to build an ecosystem around them, and we need to have people around them who've done it before, who've walked in their shoes, to help coach them when they have those near-death experiences.
Yeah. So for fintech founders, people know that Atlanta and Georgia is a big payments fintech leader. We made that up a tag. What are some common good things you've seen and mistakes you've observed from other companies, and how to navigate those challenges?
I've seen lots of good things, but I think it's a great opportunity for me to talk about mistakes that founders sometimes make, especially in the early stage. There's multiple mistakes, but I think kind of the two most common that I see, one is they get money and they spend it like crazy. I say you've got to hire slow and fire fast. And I think too often founders even believe their own enthusiasm. We've all created the plans and then realize we're not going to make anywhere close to those plans. You got to have the ambition and you got to have lofty goals, but you have to have realistic expectations on how long the money's going to last. And I think there's too many founders who just don't really think about that money. They think I'll just get more. And I think that's a big mistake that I see. And then the second big mistake that I see, especially with fintech founders, they are true subject matter experts in something, which is how they came up with the idea. They don't know how to sell. And I see this over and over again with startups who don't get the right salesperson in place early enough to really, establish the go-to-market plan. And if you're just because you're the CEO doesn't mean you know how to sell. And I think way too many founders underestimate the sales process.
Yeah. And would you say they're not, a lot of them, because with tag offices are right near Georgia Tech, so not picking on them because I think it's similar to a lot of schools is, you have people that create something, but they're probably a person that's really into product, for an example.
Yep.
Then they don't, as a CEO, a whole different set of skills, right?
Yep. And I see that way too often with founders. It's okay that you've never been a CEO. It's okay that you've never sold. You need to be incredibly aware of your weaknesses, and you need to go hire for those. And, too often I see founders who, feel like they can do it all. Now that's part of what being a founder is. You got to have that grit too, but it is a very common mistake to underestimate the need to sell and to find the right people to help you do that.
Yeah, understand your strengths and where you need to supplement that with other people, and don't let your ego get in the way, based on that. So, that's good advice. I always like to ask the question because I think leaders have sometimes a different perspective on work-life balance, if that's a thing. So you're, I think, a mother too, if your kids are grown now. And
but they were in kindergarten and third grade when I started.
So how would you respond to that?
I get this question all the time, and I truly believe this answer, but I've been saying it for decades. You can't have it all. Pick what's important to you and let the rest go. I couldn't be a homeroom mother. Never once was for either of my kids. And so what? You have to figure out what's important to you and then let the rest go, but you cannot have it all. If anyone says you can balance work, life, career, no, you can't. The way you balance it is you figure out what you're not going to do and not worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
That's how you balance it.
Yeah, that's great. So you've received a lot of awards. I covered some of those, 500 Most Powerful Leaders, Georgia's Women in Technology, so on and so forth.
You're making me blush.
No, congratulations on those. But those accolades, I mean, from you personally, how did that influence your work? And I guess being able to be in a position where you could influence others now.
Yeah. Look, I mean, awards are always great. But they have the risk of making you think you've already made it. And, humility, and it's just a really important trait for a founder. So, just stay humble. Those awards were amazing. They were absolutely amazing. And I'm truly honored, but you got to stay humble.
Stay humble. Yeah. Humility's sometimes not rated to the level it should be.
Yeah.
So talk about in your journey, sponsors and mentors
that
have influenced you, and how you look at that. And I'm sure you're doing that now for people.
I hope so. The greatest mentor that I had through all of Cardlytics' journey was Mark Johnson, who's a partner at TTV.
Yeah.
But he was a founder himself. He started a company called Check Free, had a really successful exit as a sale. And then, went on to become a partner at TTV so he could coach and help other founders. Mark was amazing. He, at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, he would sit down with Scott and I. He used to have a piece of paper that he'd fold up into his shirt pocket. And he'd pull out the piece of paper and unfold it. And I knew it was going to be a really bad session when it was filled in both sides. But he would give us advice, and he didn't mince any words. You were incredibly stupid when you did this. Don't do it again. Got it. He was just great. And the reason he was so great is because he'd been in our shoes. And that's why I think it's just so important for founders to pay it forward, because there are so few people who've been in those shoes that it's our obligation to teach others. And Mark was amazing.
Yeah. So that's it sounds like he was a coach, a mentor. So, I hear a lot about sponsors too. You kind of some degree made your own path, but as I understand, a lot of times maybe it's a man or another woman, but somebody that actually brings you along and sponsors you. I mean, what do you see in that side of the equation?
Um, I certainly didn't. I mean, my co-founder, I mean, we sponsored each other. I mean, we were
Yeah,
co-founders, but I will say in my career at Capital One, I definitely saw back to the whole, I think there are a lot of people who want to see other people succeed. I
yeah,
had so many mentors at Capital One that just really wanted to help me succeed.
yeah.
And that was amazing. And I think that's what we need to do for each other as much as possible. I mean, there are some people who think I've gotten here by myself and so I don't need to help others. I have a complete, total different philosophy than that.
Yeah. So, leadership style. Can you reflect on some key lessons in your early career, and has your leadership style changed over time?
Yeah. Yes. I think my leadership style, the thing that has not changed is I've always believed in transparency. I tell people, I give them as much information as I possibly can. Transparency goes a long way because if people understand why you're doing what you're doing or making the decision you're making, they tend to want to follow you. So transparency has always been a common theme for me in leadership. As I've gotten older and more mature in my career, I have noticed that I listen a whole lot more than I talk. And I think that's really important. When I was younger, I somewhat equated talking to being in control and having
Yeah.
power and having influence. And that's not the case at all. Sometimes you need to talk to do that. But a lot of times, if you just sit back and listen, you can be a much more effective leader.
So, reflecting back on your tremendous career, is there one or two things you're most proud of?
Um, I'm proud of the paying forward philosophy that I have. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people who worked for me, and people who worked for me 25 years ago at Capital One, I'm still in touch with and still, help. And so I'm proud of, I think I really have had an impact for many people in their careers. And that makes me proud. Of course, I'm proud of what we did with Cardlytics. I mean,
Yeah.
and like I said, the IPO was amazing. I made a couple acquisitions as CEO. Those closing dinners were amazing, but really, I think I'm proud of, I think I managed to have a career and still be liked by almost everyone who's
That's
worked.
amazing.
I mean,
No,
maybe I was too much of a softie. I don't know, but I'm proud of that.
no, that is a nice thing. That is a great thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people that you and I know, they have a great career, but they don't necessarily have all that many friends. So flipping it on its head, a lot of times we learn more from a failure or misstep than you do
Oh,
success. So do you have a story for us?
my God, I have so many stories. I mean, I'll think back to some of my most recent failures because they happen all the time. Like I said, it's all, you can have a near-death experience 3 years after you go public. But I think the thing that I most learned is what I said earlier. You have to fire fast. You have to hire slow and you have to fire fast. When I think back to most of the really bad things that happened, a bad hiring decision or a series of bad hiring decisions usually was involved in those things. And it's not that the people were bad, but it was wrong person, wrong role, wrong time, and then bad things happen. And so you've really got to be very serious about hiring, and back to the money, every penny counts.
Yeah.
And every employee needs to be contributing in a meaningful way. And you've got to be diligent about that as a CEO. And most of the failures were related to, in some way, shape, or form, a bad hire.
So hire, and then do you think, I think you're implying too that maybe you stuck with those people too long?
Always, and not never on purpose, but I have. This sounds terrible, but I've never regretted firing someone the next
Yeah.
day. It's always been like, oh my God. And honestly, I should have done that 6 months ago. And it's nothing personal. The person is a lovely human being, just wrong person, wrong job. But I see people agonize over, making a decision, and I see people not taking action. It can bring down a company.
Yeah.
So by far, I think it is the biggest mistake that you can make that can really have major consequences.
Yeah. you have to make those tough decisions and make them in timely
Yeah.
fashion.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of new generations, and we have a lot of generations in the workforce right now.
Yeah.
For myself,
Yeah.
but there's Z's, millennials. I think the alphas are coming in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you seeing different things that they want? You work with a lot of young people. So
Yeah.
what,
So
how would you describe, or are they the same?
I, I wondered about this all the time. You know how I think back to my grandparents, and I remember my grandfather being like, "Oh my God, you young kids." And I just wonder if that's the way it works. If every older generation looks at the younger generations and goes, "They're a little bit crazy." And are they really? No, they're just different. I do think they're very different. I think it is very important to understand what motivates a younger person. It is very different, I think, than what used to motivate us. We used to be motivated by just climbing up the corporate ladder, right? These young people, they want experiences. They want their work to mean something. So you have to motivate them in a very different way than you do, people more older in their career. So they're different. I don't think it means they're bad. And I don't think it means that when they're our age, they're going to be perfectly normal human beings, as normal as we are, whatever that means, right? As normal as we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Someday they'll be normal.
That's how I managed to get through raising my children. Someday they'll be normal.
Someday. Yeah. Just wait for that day.
Yep.
So we haven't talked about, again, leadership, we talk a lot at Relevance about customer 360, how you impact the customer, really customers center of, a lot of business and technology advancement. So how would you describe those two? Are you seeing companies come in with more of a focus on the customer, or even with Cardlytics, how we impact the customer?
Well, I mean, I said it earlier, if you cannot put yourself in your customer's shoes completely, if you cannot understand their point of view, then you better find someone who can really darn fast. And to your point, that is really, I think, the essence of, good 360 is you really have people who understand what the customer needs and what they want and what they care about. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think back to my sales comment, I think a lot of CEOs understand what the customer wants, but that doesn't mean they know how to communicate, sell to that particular customer. So, but yeah, it's incredibly important. I mean, you have nothing if you don't have your customers.
Well, and that might be the case of what you said earlier too, of having those younger generations in the workforce to make sure that there's a group that understands the particular customer segment.
Yeah.
So if you were starting a startup today, but where do you see the opportunities? Where would you talked about AI, but are there places that, in your investment side?
Yeah. Listen, AI is certainly an opportunity. The thing I always ask as an investor is this a product or is this a company? And I think that's the challenge with AI. Investors want to see you using it smartly. I don't know that everything you do in AI makes it a company, and so I see people come and say, we're going to automate this process and that's going to be a big company. No, it's not. But so use those tools, use them wisely. But if I were starting a company again, which I'm seriously thinking about, I would first, take as little money as I think I need to prove the concept. You get dilution really doesn't matter after round like B, because at that point you're either going to be wildly successful or you're not. So it matters in the very early days. And so, take as little as you can and make it last as long as you can. Do not spend the money just because you have it. It would be the first thing I'd be thinking about. The second thing is the absolute right people. Instead of hiring 20 people around me, I'd rather hire 3 and really figure out the go-to-market before we try to blow the thing out, So, and then the third thing would be, and this is not going to be popular, but I think it's important that people have some in-person, contact, especially when you're doing a startup. So I would have requirements for people to be around, not 5 days a week, but people need to be in a room together, brainstorming and figuring out how to get this thing off the ground. And I see a lot of startups where it's virtual from day one. And I don't know how that's going to work. Maybe I'm old.
Well, I'm older and I agree with you. So So a lot of times when money gets tight in a company, and I ran a leadership development company for 5 years before the roles I'm doing now. Leadership development, employee
Yeah,
development is first to go. What's
yeah.
your philosophy been on that?
Well, we never had a ton of money to spend on that.
Yeah,
Younger companies often don't. My philosophy has always been the manager is critical. And so I spent a lot of time laying out expectations for management. First part of it is you got to be transparent with them so they have all the information so they can effectively lead. But then you set out expectations. I expect you're meeting with your employees twice a month. I expect that you're doing a casual, doesn't have to be written and formal, but a casual review once every 6 months or so. I expect that we're going to rank our employees, and if someone's not cutting their weight, you're going to take care of it, manager. You lay out those expectations very clearly, but I think the relationship between the employee and the manager is one of the most important relationships that there is. If people don't like their boss, how can they like their job?
yeah,
And maybe not, they don't have to love their boss, but they at least
yeah.
have to respect their boss. And I think that's the way I think about leadership versus trying to teach it in a class. And but then you come back to your same shitty boss. You can't deploy any of that anyways.
Yeah, corporate boards. So you're on at least one. I know
Yeah,
you've been on more than one, but I recently attended On Board. If you're
yeah.
familiar with
Great
it.
organization. Yeah,
It's a great organization, and there's a lot of women that would like to be on corporate boards. I'm not sure if they know exactly how to get there, and On
yeah,
Board tries to help them. But
yeah.
have you seen some progress there, and what would your advice be for women, particularly
Yeah.
that want to get onto a corporate board?
Well, I mean, my first piece of advice is be realistic. There's
Yeah,
there's a tops 1,000 public companies in this because everyone wants to be on a public company board,
yeah,
right? So be realistic. You're not going to get on a public company board just because you have subject matter expertise in something.
yeah,
And if you're realistic, then the question is, well, why do you really want to be on a board? Do you want to be on a board because you want to have, influence in something it's a great way to, especially as you get more senior in your career, to sort of broaden your horizons and your perspectives. Well, then there's plenty of other boards that you can do that on, right? There's lots of nonprofits. I mean, I sit on the board of my university. And so my advice is be realistic about the likelihood of you really getting on a public company board.
yeah,
It's for most people, it's not going to happen. And then be realistic about why you want to in the first place and go see if you can find that opportunity somewhere else. By the way, if you find it somewhere else and you make a real mark, that's your best bet of then getting on a public company board is you were a great board member somewhere else.
yeah. No, that's the hard truth, I guess. Not everybody's going to find their way onto a
Yeah.
public company
I mean,
board.
you figure your average board is what, 6 people maybe?
Yeah,
How many positions come up a year? Maybe 10% of them. I mean, just if you do the math,
yeah,
there's only probably 80 board seats a year that come available. And then when you think about that and all the people in this country who want to sit on boards, it's a needle in a haystack.
yeah. And you make a good point too. I mean, you and I have both been on nonprofit boards and different boards
Yep.
where if you want to have the feeling that you're helping and participating, there's lots of opportunities for that. And there's lots of
Yeah.
nonprofits that want good people on their board. So
I will tell you, I've had more fun getting re-engaged with my alma mater, seeing the students, seeing the incubator labs that they're having on campus now, hanging out with the deans and talking about, the next wave of education. It's awesome. And these
yeah,
universities need help. So, go talk to your alma mater. Start
yeah,
there.
there you go. You heard it here first. Talk to your alma mater. So, last question, just the message you want to leave. Someone deeply involved with mentoring future leaders. So what advice would you give those that are kind of starting in their career or even a little further along towards mid-career? But if you have one message for them, what would it be?
I mean, it's so hard to have one message. Um, Grit. I'll go back to what I said in the beginning. Like
Yeah,
it's not easy. I don't care what your job is. It's not easy. You're gonna have good days and you're gonna have bad days. But if you have aspirations to be somewhere, to get somewhere, even if that aspiration is I want to retire early, you
yeah,
just gotta have grit to kind of get through it.
yeah. It's a good book too, right? Grit.
Yeah,
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 very good
yeah.
book. So Lynn, thank you for joining me on Leading with Relevance. I appreciate you, and of course, I'm sure we'll connect after this. So,
Awesome. Thanks, Tino.
yeah, all right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.